Welcome everyone to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno, episode 6, with today's special guest, Gemini Award winner, CBC Sports host of Road to the Olympic Games, as well as an author of 3 books, Scott Russell. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here, Matias. Always nice to talk to somebody who loves the Olympics.
Absolutely. So you've been a very famed CBC Sports figure, especially with your work in Road to the Olympics, as well as the Olympic Games in general. Your first Olympic Games was 1988 in Seoul, South Korea. When did you first find out that you were being sent to Seoul, and what was the initial feeling surrounding knowing that you were on your way to such an amazing spectacle?
Well, I guess I was working in Montreal at the time, and I had just gotten to Montreal in 1988. Prior to that, I'd been in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and the only network assignment I'd had prior to the Olympics was at the Canada Games in 1987, which were held in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. That was my first taste of big-time network sports, and it was terrific. I remember I covered alpine skiing and cross-country skiing in 1987, and I got to meet some pretty legendary people like Ernie Afaganis and Steve Armitage and Ted Reynolds and a number of other people who were involved in CBC Sports. Then I went to Montreal, and I did late night and weekend sportscasting. And based on my performance at Cape Breton at the Canada Games, I was offered the chance to go to Seoul for the Olympics in 1988. And wow, what a tremendous honor that was. You know, I'd never traveled to that extent internationally before, and to be going to a place as exotic as South Korea, which was really kind of opening up at the time in 1988. It was sort of like when South Korea reemerged on the world stage and as an industrial power. It was tremendously exciting, and to be going to the Olympics, which I had loved forever, was something that was tremendously exciting. And I'll never forget that moment when I got the call from Lawrence Kimber and the folks at CBC Sports saying, "Hey, we'd like you to go to the Olympic Games in Seoul this summer." It was terrific.
So you talk about your longtime love for the Olympics, and it started from when you were in your childhood. So what was it about the Olympics that really enamored you as a young kid? And was there a specific event or a moment, or what was your first real exposure to how amazing of an event that was?
I think probably the first time I really cottoned onto it on television was 1968. So I would have been 10 years old at the time. And it was, I remember watching on a black and white TV, and my dad pointed out, hey, look, what's going on in Mexico City here. And there was a stadium, 100,000 people. And the Canadian show jumping team, the equestrian team, was on the verge of winning an Olympic gold medal. And as I say, there were 100,000 people in the stadium. I'd never seen anything that big. And here were these 3 guys, Jim Elder, Jim Day, and Tom Gayford from Canada, who were relatively unknown in the world of international show jumping, and they were going to win the gold medal. It was the only gold medal that Canada won at those games, one of a very few medals that Canada won at those games. And I remember my dad being so excited by that the Canadians would actually win. And he told me at the time that these are guys that I take you down to the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto in November, and these guys are competing there with their horses, and now they're winning the Olympic gold medal. So that was tremendously exciting. And then I remember, Matias, that I went to summer camp as a kid the year after that. And we had at the time at the summer camp for 2 days in August, we had the mini Olympics. And the baseball diamond was all dressed up in bunting, and they had a cauldron above it filled with kerosene, and they had a guy come in a war canoe with a torch, and he'd light the cauldron. Opening ceremony, and for 2 days we were divided up into 5 countries. England and Canada and Germany and France and New Zealand, and we had swimming races, running races. We had a tug of war, which was the culminating event, and it was just this kind of this real pageantry and this moment of there was a sense of occasion about it. And we had people, I remember when I went to summer camp, people would come and speak to us at those Olympic Games in the opening ceremony. People like Bobby Orr came one year to speak to us at camp, and the great hockey player. And then William Davis, the Premier of Ontario, came to speak to us. And all of these kind of, it was a sense of occasion. It was a big event. And I don't know, I love the Olympics from those two things.
And so the spectacle, and I really think that the injection of how enamoring and how glamorous such an occasion as a sporting event like the Olympics can be as a kid, I think that really infuses just an everlasting passion, especially from the FIFA World Cup of Soccer is a similar event to that magnitude of people being completely mouth agape and just stargazed from all the amazing players and the talents. So in '68 Mexico City, it wouldn't have been long after then that the Olympic Games came to Canada. So did you have an opportunity when you were in 1976 to have gone to watch the Olympic Games that were held in Montreal? Or what was the experience like with watching, knowing it was on Canadian soil now?
Well, I didn't have an experience. I didn't have a chance to go. It was my last year of high school. And that summer, I was still at camp. By that time, I was probably a counselor at camp. And I remember at camp that summer, 1976, that we watched, part of the Olympic Games in Canada for the first time in Montreal. I remember watching the opening ceremony, and Abigail Hoffman, the 800-meter runner, carried in the flag for Canada. The Big O, the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, although it wasn't complete, they didn't have the arm fully finished. But that wasn't the story. The story was that the Olympics were in Canada for the very first time. Huge stadium, the biggest Canada had ever seen, the Big O. And I remember, watching parts of the games while we were at camp as members of the staff, and we gathered the kids and showed them part of the games. And I remember, Greg Joy, the high jumper from Canada, who actually saved the day for Canada because the Canadians had not won a gold medal during the course of those games. They didn't end up winning a gold medal. But on the next to last day of the games, in a rain-filled stadium, he took on the favorite, Dwight Stones of the United States. And Dwight Stones had said some kind of derogatory things about French Canadians at that point in time. And there was a real backlash against the American high jumper, who was the world record holder and the world champion. And Greg Joy beat him on that day. He didn't win the gold medal. It was a Polish jumper, I believe, that won the gold medal. But Greg Joy's silver medal was as good as gold. And I remember he cleared that bar on his final clearance. And, the way his arms came up. And that image lasted for years and years because it was part of the sign-off montage on CBC every night at midnight when CBC signed off the air, and they played "O Canada." That Greg Joy clearance in Montreal in 1976 was one of the images. But they were, tremendously magical in terms of impressing a young person that Canada could host the Olympic Games, that they were on our home soil, and that all of these people from all around the world would be in Canada. And I think that was a fantastic moment for the Olympic movement in our country.
So, especially with how Canada has played such an important part of being a generational country with the Olympics, with having competed for many years but not having held as many events as maybe some other countries, is there any moment that sticks out in particular in the history of Canadian Olympic events hosted here in our country after 1976 that you found continued to elevate the reputation of the Olympic Games in Canada? Let's say either 1988 or 2010 in Vancouver, because 1988 was the first time that was one of the first times after that the Olympic Games that they were starting to split and stagger the years that they're having winter and summer. Because 1988 they still had the Olympics in Calgary in the winter, correct?
Yeah, 1988 they had the Olympics in Calgary, the Olympic Winter Games, and then that summer is when I went to Seoul for the games in South Korea, and then in '92 that was repeated with Albertville, France, for the Winter Games, and I went to those, and then they had the games in Barcelona in '92, the Summer Games, and then they got off the quadrennial and switched it up because after '92 Albertville, they had another Winter Games in Lillehammer in '94, and then it wasn't until 1998 that they had another Winter Games, so they got on the 4-year cycle. So we had a lot of games sort of in a 4-year span. But I think when you talk about iconic moments on Canadian soil or Canadian snow, I mean, Calgary, I often refer to the Calgary games. I know a lot of people talk about Vancouver, and they were wonderful games and because of the performance of the Canadian team. But 1988 were the first really big city Olympic Winter Games. And Calgary staged magnificent games. And part of the reason was not just because of the Canadian performance, because Canada only won 5 medals at those games, and again, no gold medals. But it was because of the characters that came out of those games in Calgary in 1988. You know, you had Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the famous ski jumper from Great Britain, who created such a wonderful story. He finished dead last, but, you know, he had been a frustrated alpine skier. He had slept in the back of his car in a mental hospital in cow sheds in order to get to the games, and he had no funding, and he became the darling. There was the Jamaican bobsled team. It was such a huge part of the story of the Calgary Games, but also wonderful athletes like the alpine skier from Italy, Alberto La Bomba Tomba, Matti Niikanen, the great flying Finn, the ski jumper. And then you had, great events involving Canadians, and particularly in figure skating. The Battle of the Bryans, Brian Orser of Canada and Brian Boitano of the United States, who were so close, and Orser ended up winning the silver medal. But I mean, it could have been anybody's gold medal to win. Just so happened that Boitano did, and it was a great competition. And then the Battle of the Carmens, Katharina Witt of East Germany and Debbie Thomas of the United States, but coming right up through the middle and almost winning the gold medal was Elizabeth Manley of Canada. And she put on that Stetson hat, the white Stetson hat, and the crowd went wild at the Saddle Dome. So there were these great moments of Calgary, the great characters of Calgary that became so important to Olympic lore. And, Calgary was in 1988. That was the first time we saw Kurt Browning in a big way. And he was just, he finished, I think, in 8th place or something like that in the men's figure skating, but he was just unbelievable. He was on the verge of throwing the quad for the first time. And, he was a he was an Albertan, and he lit it up and became a great iconic figure of the games. Vancouver, absolutely. Those 14 gold medals and the great performance of the Canadian team. Alex Bilodeau finally cracks the egg and wins the gold medal on home snow. It was wonderful. The golden goal by Sidney Crosby and the Canadian team winning the Canadian women winning the gold medal in hockey. So many great moments. Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer, the ice dancers, winning the gold medal. Vancouver was just a tremendous celebration of Canadian sport and Canadian achievement, and that proved that not only in the Olympics but in the Paralympics, that Canadians were world-class athletes and capable of world-class performances. That was the beauty of Vancouver, that we were not an also-ran country. We were at the very center of performance at the Olympics.
And especially you mentioned the Sidney Crosby goal and the Alex Bilodeau gold medal in terms of iconic Canadian moments. Canadians winning a gold medal, especially on home soil, is something that is not forgotten for a long time. And I remember where I was when I watched the 2010 Sidney Crosby golden goal. That moment, what was the magnitude of that moment when you witnessed it, wherever you may have been, and how did it connect to the experience that you had with working Hockey Night in Canada years past in your career, and just for Canadian sport and hockey in general, and Canada's reputation at the Olympics?
Well, I was covering the games. The rights for those games in Vancouver, Whistler in 2010 belonged to CTV and to Bell Globe Media. I was CBC, so we didn't have the rights to the games, but I was there covering the games for CBC National News, and I was stationed throughout the games at Whistler, the Whistler Mountain Village, and so I covered the alpine events and a lot of the events that went up there, the sliding events and so on. But I remember being in our hotel room, which served as our sort of studio, and it overlooked the sort of the area in Whistler Mountain Village, and they had big TV screens set up, but the village was silent during the game. Everybody was indoors watching, their own TVs. And, we were watching it on TV as well. My good friend, Chris Cuthbert, who I had worked with for many years on Hockey Night in Canada, was calling the game at those Olympics. And when he said that, the golden goal, Sidney Crosby scores and Canada wins the gold medal. At that point in time, everybody in Whistler rushed out of where they were staying and into the village square, and the celebration was on. The music started. It was, absolutely jubilant. And, I've never seen a celebration quite like that about one thing that has happened, and it was really something to witness. But I think that obviously was such a huge landmark moment for Canadian sport, that Canada would win the gold medal in hockey at home at the Olympic Games. And you remember the previous Winter Games in Torino in 2006 had not gone well for the Canadian men's hockey team. They didn't win a medal of any kind in 2006. And to have Crosby come back, score the winner, it was like the dream scenario, and particularly to beat the United States on our home ice in Vancouver. It was an iconic moment for Canadian sport.
And I remember watching during that game when America had tied it up with not much time left. We all just sat there shocked and stunned, like, is this really going to happen? And considering Canada is an amazing country at hockey when it comes to the Olympic Games and international events, and there's been a lot of close moments that they've had fall in their favor and out of their favor against rivals such as the United States or Russia. But as it stands, in your experience with working the Olympic Games, would you say that moment, the Sidney Crosby moment, was the most excited and jubilant you'd ever seen a crowd, and B, would you say that stands as the most iconic moment in Canadian international hockey history in terms of the Olympic Games?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly right there in terms of international hockey history. Obviously, the 1972 Summit Series, where Paul Henderson scored, and they won the game in Moscow, and Canada had to win those last 3 games, and they did. And Henderson scored those goals in all the games. That was huge as well. The Canada Cup in 1976 was very big. Mario Lemieux and all those guys. But you know, that was certainly very huge. Sidney Crosby winning that gold medal, that would be very hard to top that. Salt Lake City was also very big because Canada won the gold medal in men's hockey for the first time in a lot of years, in 2002, in 50 years. And Lemieux played a huge part in that. I mean, I think I said 1976 Lemieux was involved. That's not true. But 1976 was Bobby Orr in the Canada Cup. He was the MVP. But Lemieux and the part he played in 2002 in Canada winning the gold medal, that was also very big. But it's hard to top winning gold at home in Vancouver when Crosby scores in overtime.
For Canadian Olympic sport in general, would you say that, like, obviously hockey is one of Canada, like the most, you could argue the most prominent sport in our country. In terms of the way that it translates into Olympic success, would you say that there's other events that Canada would pride themselves on as close to hockey, or would you say that hockey holds its weight above, in a class of its own, above all the other sports that Canadians compete in the Olympics?
Well, I've always said there are 3 sports in Canada which kind of in the winter stand above all the rest, and hockey is the national obsession. Curling is the national pastime, and figure skating is the national passion. And I would say that while the winning a gold medal in hockey, whether it be men's or women's hockey, is certainly very coveted, that winning a gold medal in figure skating, as Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer did in 2010 and did again in 2018 in Pyeongchang when they won the ice dance in that marvelous competition against the French, Papadakis and Cizeron. I mean, that reaction was absolutely spectacular. And then, I take you back to 1998 in Nagano, the first time that curling appeared as a full medal sport at the games, and 4 young mothers from Saskatchewan, the Sandra Schmerler rink, won the gold medal. That was pretty extraordinary and very, very important to so many Canadians. There's a lot of pressure on them to win. Certainly the Canadians were the favorites in both men's and women's competition. Mike Harris won the silver medal and his rink from Ontario. But the Sandra Schmerler rink lived up to expectations, and from small town Saskatchewan, and they won that gold medal. That was huge. So I would say in those 3 sports, in curling and in figure skating and in hockey, to win a gold medal in any one of those sports is absolutely preeminent in this country.
In terms of your view on the sports that you enjoy consuming the most, obviously the Olympics is such a fantastic event to watch and enjoy and be a part of. But are there particular sports or events that you find that are the most enjoyable for yourself personally, in terms of watching Canadians, or just in terms of watching the talent in general? Or is it hard to pick a few that are the most special to you?
Well, it's hard to pick, Matthias. I mean, I love all sport, and it is very difficult to pick those sports that strike a chord with me, because there are so many. But I will tell you that, I mean, I absolutely love alpine skiing, and I love going to Lake Louise and to seeing the World Cup, and seeing the downhill or a great slalom race. It's a great spectacle to be able to go to Kitzbühel in Austria and see that magnificent Hahnenkamm downhill is spectacular. There's no other way to put it. I've also had the good fortune to be in the stadium at the Olympic Games for the 100-meter final, and to see Usain Bolt and to go to the World Championships in track and field, that's absolutely riveting and exciting beyond belief. But so is the 1,500 meters at a World Championships in athletics. I would say this: for many years, I covered gymnastics, and to be at the Olympic Games in 1996 in Atlanta, and to see Shannon Miller and Carrie Strug and the American women win that gold medal, when they have to walk the balance beam in front of 39,000 people in the Georgia Dome, and they're the only people on the balance beam, which is 4 inches wide. I mean, that's quite something. So, I mean, there's so much about so many different sports that has a great appeal for me, that, as you say, it would be difficult to pick out, the ones that are my favorites. But there certainly are so many thrilling moments in all of sport.
In terms of the future of Canadian sport in the Olympics, in terms of when Canada would host again, or how Canada would put themselves forward to be a country that holds the Olympic Games, what city do you think would be the next venue that Canada would attempt or should try to get? I know Calgary declines the bid for 2026, but do you think it'd be possible for there to be Olympic Games held right in the heart, or in Toronto in Canada? Or do you think that there's another city that would put themselves forward as the best candidate to host another summer or winter Olympic Games?
Well, I firmly believe that there are, there's more than one city in Canada that could host a modern Olympic Games. The rules have changed a little bit. Games have to be sustainable now. You want to make sure that games don't create a legacy of debt, which is certainly a problem going forward. But I think the approach to the Olympic Games will certainly change. I absolutely believe that Toronto should be able to host a modern Olympic Games. And quite frankly, I think that had Toronto decided to bid after hosting the Pan American Games in 2015, I think that they would have probably been successful had there been a will in the city at the time to host the games. But there wasn't a political will. But I think they would have been a very strong candidate. I think that Calgary, had they decided to bid for 2026, I think that they most assuredly would have won the bid. As it turned out, only two other places bid, the Italian bid, which ultimately won, and Stockholm in Sweden, which had no public support. But I think Calgary could host the games again, and I think Vancouver could host the games again. And quite frankly, I think Quebec City could host a Winter Games if they were to follow a model of a modern Olympic Games, which might see the alpine events held in another location, i.e. maybe they could be held in Alberta or in Whistler in order to get the downhill in. But I think all of those places could host the Olympic Games. And quite frankly, I think that Canada is a prosperous country that is seen to be an open country, inclusive, and really is at the heart of the Olympic movement. And our country should be able to host a modern Olympic Games.
Well, Scott, we're just about out of time here on today's episode, but I want to have one last question before we wrap up here. So if there was advice that you could have given to your younger self from the experience that you have now with having worked at CBC Sports before you had entered into the program that would have taken you on your journey that you've made now, what would that advice be to your younger self?
Boy, that's a great question, Matthias. And I don't have very many regrets. I was a teacher, a high school teacher, before I got into sports broadcasting and before I went back to do a master's degree in journalism at Western University in London. I would say that, and it would be the same advice that I probably followed, albeit unwittingly, on my way to where I am now. And that is to, provide provide yourself with as much life experience as you possibly can, and to travel the world and see what's out there. One of the things that I've always thought to be very important about sports broadcasting is to not do it from afar, but to do it from close to the field of play, to be there, and to witness it firsthand, because that's where the magic is. Um, I'm a little bit fearful about what the future of sport is without fans in the stands, as a result of what's gone on with the pandemic, because I think that that nature of being close to the spectacle of sport is so very important to how you can relate the story of sport to people around the world and to bring the story home. I think that the advice that I would give myself is to always want to be there, to be close to the action and where it's happening.
Well, Scott, those are very wise words, and it's a great sentiment to what sport is all about and how it really creates magic in the moments that we witness in sport, and why it is such a powerful and has such a powerful social impact on people who are fans, who are participants, who are coaches, who are officials. And that's, I really think, what we're missing right now is being able to watch and follow more sport and be able to play in sport. And I really think that being there is the most important part of why we play and why we watch and why we officiate and why we do what we do in sport. So, Scott, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for huddling up.